All right, good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started now. And the next person I will introduce is President Webb, president of Laney College, who will then introduce Chancellor Ortiz, our chancellor of the Peralta Community College District. But before I go there, I just want to very quickly make sure I thank Chancellor Ortiz before this gets going and gets away from me for having the vision to support sustainability and to see the connection between sustainability and resiliency, and certainly to lead the district in a direction where we're not just talking the talk, but we're walking the walk, and we're putting dollars behind that walk. So without the support of Chancellor Ortiz, his leadership, and that of his cabinet of senior administrators, we would not have been able to put on the very successful EcoFest Sustainability Festival yesterday, and neither would we be able to have this policy level discussion today. Both events are free to attendees, and that's compliments of the lead sponsor, the Peralta Community College District. So thank you very much, Chancellor. Much appreciated, sir. With that, I want to say special thank you to Dr. Webb for hosting us yesterday and giving us essentially the run of your campus. We try not to be too intrusive, but in cases where we were, thanks to you and your staff for indulging us. Dr. Webb is president of Laney College and is very forward-looking as well. She's been very supportive of all of these events, and she welcomes us today again to her campus and to her facilities. So with that, Dr. Webb.
I'm very proud of this gentleman for choosing to follow the leadership of our chancellor, of the vice chancellor, and ensure that the direction as it relates to sustainability initiative is quite remarkable in this district. I'm also very proud to welcome all of you and those who are going to join us in this room over the next few hours to Laney College. Laney chooses to activate the community in community college. And so while some folks believe there may be intruding on spaces on the campus, this campus is for the community. And I think our chancellor is going to come before you in a few moments, agrees with that the Peralta Community College District, including Laney College, is all about the community. And as one of our key speakers conveyed earlier today, it's all about being very pleased to know that our community of Oakland, of the East Bay, of Northern California, of this United States, within this plant, on this planet, is all about how to ensure that conditions become healthier in ways that can be sustained. And that's what this is all about. Without further ado, I want to ask a very important gentleman who serves as the leader of this district to come forward and provide his introductory remarks. And I want to say that he is concerned about not just the obvious in terms of our mission, career technical education, around workforce development and all of that means and much more, transfer education, foundation skills that lead one to go into one of those directions, whether it's immediate into a career or directly to transfer accredited college or university and then into careers or entrepreneurial activities, or elected offices, like our distinguished president of the board here, who's part of this program, demonstrating his further investment. So when the chancellor comes forward, recognize he is always thinking about the big picture and how sustainability initiatives is more than just an idea, more than just a system, more than just some practices. It's a holistic, much more, and I won't say more because he'll present more. Without further ado, I'd like to ask our chancellor to come forward, Dr. Jose Ortiz.
Thank you very much, Dr. Webb, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I want to, on behalf of our Board of Trustees, our faculty, administration, our classified staff, welcome you to Laney College. Thank you, Dr. Webb, for hosting this event. I have actually, coming here this morning, I had an excuse not to be here. I am recovering from a bicycle injury and having some difficulty breathing and speaking. But it was important enough to me to be here because, as Dr. Webb has said, what we're talking about today and the issues of sustainability, environmental health, is very important, not only to all of you here, but it is to me. I came to the Peralta District knowing full well that this is a progressive district, one that is very conscious of the world around us, and as it was said in the invocation this morning, that the spirit of life that we are all beneficiaries of is also contingent on the spirit of our environment. And this Board of Trustees, led by Trustee Guillen, who has also seen that vision of how sustainability affects us all, they passed a policy, a sustainability policy that I believe, if it's not one of the few, maybe the only one in the country from a community college district to have a sustainability policy. And that what that means to us is that, you know, what it was 20 years ago, or maybe it's 30 years ago now, when we talked about save a tree. Now we all know today that it's the interconnectedness of the earth, the air, the water, the oceans, health, all of these interconnected factors, and the sustainability of all of that is what we are now mindful of, aware of, and know how important it is that we look at these areas to sustain not only our present way of living, but for future generations. So I want to commend our Board of Trustees for recognizing that sustainability is the way of life. And it's not just, as Dr. Webb says, it's not just for us about, you know, workforce development and offering classes in English, mathematics, and sciences, but it's taking it another step further and taking it to a practice where the Peralta colleges not only provide and support these type of activities, but we also practice sustainability. As you will see, we are continue to move into sustaining and recycling our environment. We are striving to be efficient with our resources. Sometimes it's not easy, but I want you to know that that is our most profound intent, to be sustainable as a district and to provide our community with an example of what a sustainable community can be. So I want to welcome you to our conference today. Charles talked about, Charles has really gotten over the top when he wanted to thank me for this sponsorship. I think he's reacting to when I saw him this morning. I said, Charles, you know, we sponsored this event, but I don't see any recognition in the brochure. So, so he had to take another 30 minutes to talk about it. But it's really not about that. It's really about all of us recognizing the importance of sustainability, the importance of how we are all interconnected in this universe in making life what it is for us, for our neighbors, and for future generations. So thank you for being part of this, and thank you for keeping the charge after you come out of this conference. So again, welcome, have a great day, and thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Are we going to introduce? So around here, you have to learn how to be very quickly self-correcting, and you have to adapt continuous improvement, or you won't be as effective as you possibly could. So thanks again, Chancellor. And with that, I would certainly like to bring up the president of our Board of Trustees, the Honorable Abel Guillen.
How's everybody feeling this beautiful morning? Good. Well, I'm excited to be here. It's always a good day at Laney College. We are the gateway for the community. We are the agent to transform lives. I'm very proud of my association with the Peralta Colleges and the work that we've done, particularly around sustainability. You may know that, as the Chancellor mentioned, we did establish a sustainability policy that is far-reaching. And how that materializes itself is that in all our construction projects, we pledge to have at least LEED Silver certification, if not gold, in our construction projects. Up at Merritt College, we have probably the largest photovoltaic system in Oakland, which we're very proud of as well, that generates our electricity and also puts money back into the classrooms because it's money that we don't have to pay to energy providers. We're putting that money back in the classrooms to offer the services that we need for our students. Very proud of the fact that we're very practical here as well. We saw a need for our students in the fact that they had trouble getting to school at times. So we partnered with AC Transit to actually create an easy pass for our students and encourage public transportation. For $30 a semester, our students are able to get a pass for the entire semester, not a month, but for the entire semester, so they can get to school, to work, and home. That partnership has actually resulted in about 1.6 million bus rides for our students since inception. I can't even begin to calculate, and some of you probably know better than I do, what that means in terms of CO2 emissions not generated because our students are actually taking public transportation. Very proud of the leadership that the Board of Trustees has taken, and on behalf of my colleagues of the board, we welcome you to Laney, and we hope that you have a great conference. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Go Eagles.
One of the questions that we were asked is, what is the connection between resilience and sustainability? There are two connections. If you think about the reason or the purpose for trying to prepare to be resilient, it's being resilient in the aftermath of a disaster. For instance, you remember Sandy in New Jersey. You saw the power lines were down. All right, you saw them waiting 3 or 4 days until the different agencies got to their particular area to help them and give them support. Well, we are taking affirmative action to be able to stand on our own feet. We're not waiting, we're not being reactive, but there are things that we can do. For example, in terms of energy supply, well, this district has right around 1.8 megawatts of solar power. So if the grid goes down, is there a way for us to tap into our own solar power and help out? So energy is an issue, because when energy goes down, a lot of things stop, as you guys well know. Not long ago, we had to send some people home because we lost power to one of our buildings through no fault of our own. But you can't do anything without power. That's one thing. The other thing, and most importantly, I think, is that no matter what happens in the event of a disaster, these colleges will be deeply involved one way or another. We get probably here at Laney, I'm going to say, in the neighborhood of 11,000 students coming through, more than 11,000 students coming through at one point or another. So just imagine that there was some catastrophic disaster and students were on the ground and couldn't go anywhere. All right? So they would have to stay here. And perhaps they'd be bringing rescue authorities, rescue agencies would be bringing more people here. So it's important that these campuses are able to sustain both structurally and otherwise. All right, so that's one of the main connections there. It's about being able to help ourselves and see how sustainability come into that. On a micro level, a lot of these disasters we're hearing are caused by climate change. And I'm sorry, that's on a macro level. On a micro level, we can take individual actions to mollify the rate of our march towards climate change, and that helps us all collectively. So those are just two of the connections to think about as we go forward in this policy discussion today.
Good to see so much interest in resiliency. I know this term has been bantered around so much that you might have got sick of it by now, but we are very happy and very proud that we found a partner with Laney College, with the City of Oakland, and all the other cities that are participating here, San Francisco, Alameda, Berkeley, even Richmond, other cities. So this is great. And we are honored to have two very esteemed keynote speakers who are really going to help us frame our discussion today. And just so you know, Peralta College has 3 campuses in Alameda, Berkeley, and Oakland, has 2 campuses in Oakland. These cities, including San Francisco, were just awarded as part of the Rockefeller 100 City Initiative. They started a conversation about a month ago, and this is really framed as a second part of that conversation. We want to get more into what resiliency means from a community engagement standpoint, from our partnerships, and this is the whole point that we want to frame this conversation. But to jump into it, we're going to lead off with, we have 2 Michaels for you to make things very confusing. So I want to invite both Michaels up. We have Michael Schmitz, who is the Executive Director of ICLEI, and I won't even try to say what ICLEI stands for, Local Governments for Sustainability USA. So we're proud to have him speak along with a tag team effort with Mr. Michael McCormick, of the Senior Planner and Advisor with the California Governor's Office of Planning. So these 2 gentlemen are experts, and they're gonna help frame our conversation. And then we are gonna have 2 panels, a community partners panel as respondents, and then a city policy leader panel as respondents. And then we wanna get each and every one of you engaged in this discussion, okay? We want this to be an interactive. This is not just for you to sit back and there's going to be a lot of information, but we want to hear your voices and be part of this. So we're going to encourage that all afternoon. So gentlemen, take it away, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Laney College, the Peralta Community College District, for all the organizers that made this happen for a couple of reasons. First is that it is real leadership. Frankly, as a personal part, I grew up in Oakland. And in fact, back when middle school was junior high, I was a ball boy here at Laney. So coming back and being asked and honored to be part of this here, as part of what Peralta Community College District's leadership and Laney College is providing, it brings me a great deal of pleasure, and thank you very much for your leadership, all of you. I want to set part of the table. I was very good at forks and knives and napkins, and I'll leave the rest of the table to be set by my colleague and friend from Governor's Office. I want to talk about what, first of all, set the overall context we're talking about briefly, and then get right into action, because everybody here is involved in already doing real good work, but they're also looking at how to make it work on the ground and scale it up and impact broadly. So action is happening at the local level. I want to get into that quickly. Let's first start with the next slide, the context. And frankly, I just want to pause on this for a second, have folks take in what are some statements by some very conservative bodies. And when I say conservative, I mean these are cautious folks. The first one comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on, the first one comes from Swiss Re, which is one of the globe's largest reinsurers. Very financially cautious, conservative folks who have looked at estimates that they can attribute economic losses from natural catastrophes and man-made disasters, and have estimated losses last year alone at $140 billion. The second is a statement, and that's a huge number. Now, the second is what makes that first even more alarming, which is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, with their latest assessment, has now stated that with high confidence, climate change will increase systemic risks due to extreme weather events, leading to breakdown of infrastructure, networks, and critical services. Now, this is the world's largest body of leading experts on climate change. They come to these statements very cautiously, very slowly, and only after broad consensus. When they make a statement like this, what you are seeing is the most conservative estimate of the future impacts. So you take that $140 billion loss estimated in 2013, and you take the statement from the IPCC, and what you have is a very strong likelihood of more extreme, more frequent events leading to more damage and, frankly, more disruption in our society across the globe and everywhere. So that's the context. But here's the thing. I know most of you already have some sense of this. So I want to turn to the next slide and talk about where and how this is affecting us in different places. One thing about extreme weather is it varies where you are and what the impacts will be. So one thing, if you look across the country, when we talk about extreme weather, you can see that depending upon where you are, you may view it in different lens. We are used to talking about things like erosion of our coastlines, snowpack impact for the Sierra, and most critically, the effect on our water supply and drought. If you look across the plains and you look across the southeast, you're talking about extreme events associated with tornadoes, hurricanes, increasing impacts. But you're also talking about, depending upon where you are, all sorts of different extreme weather events. What you are certainly talking about is more frequent and more extreme. So turning to the next slide, there is a very real economic impact of these increases in temperature. And this has been measured also by these, by the IPCC and other global financial institutions. And what you're starting to see is estimates of economic losses from the direct impact of increase in temperature. And the incomplete estimates, which is of course a very cautious way of saying it's probably more than this, are anywhere from 0.2 to 2% of the income of GDP, with an increase beyond 2 degrees increase as a result of climate change. Now, then I want to quickly actually go to the second statement, because this is where we start to talk about a bit of hope. Because if you look at taking actions, and what we're going to be talking about here today, you can actually deal with this slowing economic rate if we take action to avoid climate damages. And this is what a lot of the folks in the trade will talk about as adaptation or resilience. But there is a way to deal with more extreme weather through smart planning, through investment in infrastructure, and things we're going to be talking about later. So next slide. This is where I want to turn to what is actually, in my mind, the biggest source of hope, which is that we at the local level, at the community level, actually control our destiny and our future through many of the policy levers, many of the things that we do day to day, which will aggregate and have the direct effect on reducing the increase of CO2 emissions and being able to adapt to a changing climate. At the local level, unlike Congress, we don't need to wait for a law to be passed to take action. In fact, cities, and I'm quite proud, and although we represent as ICLEI a global network of local governments across the globe, 17 offices, more than 1,000 cities across the world, I can tell you that cities in the Bay Area, cities and counties throughout California are amongst the leaders. And frankly, they've been putting their money where their mouth is and pushing forward despite challenges, despite limited budgets for many, many years. And what you have as a result are proven, demonstrated successes on the ground in the Bay Area in particular. And I think it's a great source of optimism if we can get out there and tell the story. I think it's very important to tell the story of what's actually going on. And this is where we'll hear from our leaders and my colleagues and others from Berkeley, Oakland, Alameda, San Francisco, and the greater Bay Area throughout the course of the day. When we talk about what we can control, you know, we don't have to wait for Congress to act, which is a good thing. We can move with various levers in terms of creating more livable places through land use, zoning decisions, through investment, what we choose to invest in, how we choose to invest in our water, our transit, and our infrastructure in our public works, that how we create places we live have a direct effect on both CO2 emissions and then how we'll respond to extreme weather events. So the real cause of hope in my mind is that we can control the levers that make the real difference. Next slide. The question, of course, that comes up with a lot of folks who are in this space is, what do we do first, or what do we do primarily? You know, do we try to reduce CO2 emissions? Do we try to mitigate? Do we try to get down the number so that we don't hit 2 degrees or 3 degrees? Or do we focus our efforts on adapting to extreme weather? Do we try to deal with the impacts that are already here? You know, either or. Well, we'd say either or, yes, which is to say we need to do both because they're both related. And in fact, when you take actions to build a green infrastructure, you are both protecting against extreme weather events, and you're also reducing CO2 emissions as a result of that. When you have a solar rooftop program, you are doing both of those things. You're building redundancy in the system. You're also creating a clean energy source which helps reduce CO2 emissions. So the answer, quite simply, is there is no conflict. The answer is to do both and actually the strategies that we believe that are being proven on the ground that both at the city and county level and then with leaders like the Peralta Community College District, they're showing it can be both and it doesn't take a choice of either or. Next slide. One of the things we're particularly excited about is building a conscious leadership movement across the country. And in fact, we had Chancellor Guillon sign the agreement this morning. We are promoting with our partners, National League of Cities, U.S. Green Building Council, and the World Wildlife Fund, a leadership movement across the U.S. that covers large and small cities and counties, villages, mega cities, the rural, urban, Midwest, Southwest, and East Coast, in a Resilient Communities for America campaign that says we can do something about extreme weather, we can do something about impacts to the economy, we can do something about impacts to our energy future, and we can come together and make it clear to our national leaders in Washington, to our leaders in state houses. Not all are as forward-thinking as we happen to have in California. And we can have an impact because local leadership really matters. And this is a way also, and I want to tie this into the future panels coming up, is to connect mayors, city council members, supervisors to the community organizing that's going on is really critical. And this is one thing we always underscore, that city leaders, the mayor, the supervisor, have a great deal of ability to act on what they can control so that you can have city services, fleets, the things that cities own and operate. And you can make big decisions and change practices. And that affects about 5 to 8% of the footprint, which is to say that's a great start. What needs to be done then is to encourage and activate the community and look to leadership from the community, because you have somewhere between 93 and 95% of the action that has to happen outside of what you control. So to be a leader is to understand what works, what's effective, and then be able to engage with the community. So next slide. A couple things that I want to get Mike up here on the stage very quickly, but I want to talk about some of the things that we think are really key parts of this Resilient Communities for America, and frankly, just about building a resiliency movement. First, obviously, you need to prepare for the impacts of extreme weather and climate change. And this is one of those things that needs to be repeated. This is a crowd that understands that. And I think this is where we need to think of ourselves as leaders and spokespeople and folks who get out and communicate. But we do need to get out there and make the message known that wherever you are, we need to prepare for more extreme events and for more frequent extreme events. We need to look at those things that will reduce CO2 emissions, which are creating extreme events. We believe that expanding renewable energy, clean energy, and increasing energy efficiency are the smartest, best, and most targeted way to do that. It is absolutely critical that we get off of fossil fuels as the main way that we drive our economy forward. We not only see it from an economic and energy perspective, but we see it from a public health perspective. And this is one of those things that we feel is critical as part of building resilient communities. We also feel that, and we hear this from across the country, that to be able to be resilient and to future-proof our cities and towns and communities, we need to strengthen our infrastructure in smart ways. We need to not look to the past as a prediction of the future, but we need to understand what practices work, how we're going to have our water systems and our energy systems and our transportation systems to both be able to survive the brunt of more extreme weather, but also to be able to take advantage of smart insights and technologies. We are in California. We should learn from the Aussies about how to structurally deal with drought. There are folks who understand this, and in fact, we're fortunate as well to have both leaders at the local level in the state of California who are pushing this forward. But there are ways that we can build in this kind of already known smarts into our planning processes and infrastructure. So that's part of strengthening infrastructure, building it smarter for the future, and knowing what's coming, and not waiting for it to hit and then respond. And then, of course, what it all ties back to, and frankly, I think is probably going to be a message hopefully we'll hear throughout the day, is strengthening the local economy, because frankly, all of this needs to be centered around people. And when we're talking about how to build communities, we're talking about economic activity, we're talking about jobs and businesses, and we're talking about how folks who live in the communities can bounce back and be able to grow and thrive and prosper. So we need to have places that work for the people who are there. So that's, I think, a key part of building resilient communities. So next slide. Actually, we can go through these pretty quickly. Some of what I wanted to let folks know is that we do work with folks who have both been doing this for decades. Like, I know Chris Worthington from the city of Berkeley is here as one of these leaders who has been pushing this for many years. And then folks who are just getting started. We help try to get folks up to speed and then get them to be cutting edge as quickly as possible with tools, resources, data to be able to help them make their jobs easier. One of the things local governments face, no matter where they are in the U.S., is tight budgets and trying to make things work. We want to try to reduce the number of trade-offs that have to be made so that it can be done smartly and it can be done with state-of-the-art technology, but you don't have to sacrifice on getting the right results. Next slide. So actually, this is actually underscoring some of the points I made before. So you can go through this. Next slide. Yes, next slide. And next slide. I think, let's just move to the last slide, and I'll just say a few words. And we can, go ahead, next slide. And there it is. That's the last slide. See, because what I really want to underscore is that we have the ability, and in fact, we have already been seeing actions being taken that demonstrate real results. What is now the challenge is to be able to replicate those. So in the Bay Area, we have some 91 local governments. Amongst the leaders throughout the state, and frankly, the state is amongst the leaders throughout the country. When I go to global meetings with leaders from across various countries across the world, California and frankly, Bay Area often are cited as the leaders for wherever you are in terms of what's going on. Now, that should feel very good and fill a lot of folks with pride and confidence that we're doing the right thing. Frankly, we need to be able to do what we're doing in Berkeley and Oakland and San Francisco and do it through 438 local governments in California, and we need to be able to do that with 15,000 plus local governments across the U.S. because we have the ability to do it, but we need to scale it up. So pilots are good, and pilots let us know what works. But unless we scale it up, we won't deal with those numbers that we're facing. So it's critical to move from the cutting edge to the mainstream. And I think I'll turn it to Mike with this thought that one of the things we have that not many other places have is a framework from the state the state government, and state government is a contentious thing. I mean, it represents the will of the Californian people, and it's a many-splendored thing. But let me tell you that the state government in California has set up a regulatory framework on climate change that is the leader in the nation, and frankly, amongst the leaders in the world. And what that has done has allowed leaders like folks we have in this room, and folks who are not leaders, but that need some guidance, to all move forward. Cities and counties in California provide leadership in part, I would say, because of both the inspiration and because they're also told that they must do it. So regardless of whether you're a leader by choice or by force, California's regulatory framework has allowed local governments and communities in California to advance. So with that, I think it's key to have the context. I hopefully put the fork on the right side, the knife and the spoon and the napkin under the fork, and Mike, it's your turn to bring us to what California is doing. Thank you very much. Look forward to today.
Thank you, sir. My esteemed colleague, Michael Schmitz. Well, it's great to be here today. I just wanted to highlight, thank you to Laney College and City of Oakland for helping to organize this and reaching out. We're always happy to come talk with our local and regional partners and academic communities about the work that we're doing in California and how we can do a better job, which typically in small sessions like this, we typically hear quite a bit about how we could be doing a better job. So I encourage that as a part of the conversation today. I did want to mention a couple of things with ICLEI. They are certainly not one of the entities that are working in a vacuum. The state of California is working actively with ICLEI, which stands for International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives. Have that memorized. But here in the US, it's Local Governments for Sustainability. And I've worked with them at the local level. I've worked with them at the regional level. I've worked with them in partnerships as contractors to the state. And I've worked with them in the international community as well, as we go out and talk with our international partners on how to move forward on climate. So they're deeply engaged in the work that we're doing at every level of government, both horizontally and vertically. The Seek Clear Path tool, which he didn't go over too deeply here, is a really important part of the puzzle. And I'll get to that in a couple of minutes and talk about some of the work there. So, I think a lot of this conversation is, we're talking a lot about climate change, but what does climate change actually mean? Well, there's two sides of the puzzle, but it doesn't end there. We have the mitigation side, right, which deals with greenhouse gas emissions going up into the atmosphere affecting climate change. And then we have the other side, which is adaptation and resiliency, and how do we accommodate the changes in climate that are already starting to occur and that we can anticipate further changes in the future. Well, the greatest adaptation and resiliency strategy we have is to significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Because what that means is we'll be able to do less on the adaptation and resiliency side, and those costs will come down significantly. So the state of California is dedicated and really focused on this greenhouse gas emissions side of things, because we know ultimately it's going to significantly reduce the costs of adaptation and resiliency in the future. And tools like what ICLEI's developed through Seek Clear Path help our local and regional partners do that in partnership with the state. Let's go to the next slide. So at the state level, we have an interesting structure. It started back in early 2000s through some bills that floated that dealt with vehicle emissions. And in 2005, Governor Schwarzenegger passed an executive order establishing targets for greenhouse gas emissions reductions for statewide activities. And basically two targets were established, one in 2020, which is basically getting back to 1990 levels by 2020. And then in 2050, 80% below 1990 emission levels by 2050. This is a really significant and important goal to think about. When we think about an emission reduction target like that for 2050, what does that mean? Well, we think about the transportation infrastructure we have and the vehicles that are on the road. They're going to need to be about 85% zero emissions. Most likely that means they're going to be electric vehicles, but that means they're going to plug into the grid. And right now, the grid is not zero emissions either, so we really need to be aiming for zero emissions for a grid as well. So by 2050, we're really looking at the need to transform some of our infrastructure to support achieving these longer-term goals and targets that we have at the state level. We've got a couple different ways of doing that. We're certainly, since this initiative just started in 2005, we have a long way to go, but I think we've made some really good progress. We're on track to hit our target in 2020. Which is an exciting piece of news. So we typically deal with climate change through three different categories at the state, and this helps us to think about funding sources. It helps us think about how to categorize policies, but ultimately the goal is to institutionalize the consideration of climate change through everything we do at the state, how we spend our money, and really get an adequate return on investment for taxpayer dollars. When we think about the investments in infrastructure and natural landscapes that the state makes, they're very significant. If we're not considering the impacts of climate change as we think about those investments, then we're not actually doing a good job of thinking about that return on investment for taxpayer dollars. So we have three different categories we typically look at. One is the reduction of emissions, and this is through that 2005 executive order that I mentioned earlier. And this is primarily managed through the AB 32 scoping plan. There's an update that was just completed and a significant new language in there. It tracks progress to date of how we're doing on our greenhouse gas emission reductions. It really sets starting the path for post-2020 emissions reductions as well. So I encourage you to look at the Air Resources Board website to get some more information on that. Preparing for climate action is preparing for the climate impacts that we're starting to feel and are going to feel more deeply in the future is the next category we think about. And really this is managed through the California Adaptation Strategy, which was first completed in 2009, which, although surprising, it was the first multi-sector adaptation strategy at the state level in the United States. So we were very pleased about that as you know, being a leader in California. But we also acknowledge that being a leader on that is not necessarily a wonderful thing. Climate impacts are certainly something that affects all of us, and talking about it can be a sensitive issue. We've gone through and updated the adaptation strategy. It's now called the Safeguarding California Plan, which augments that original strategy. It doesn't take the place of it, it augments it. It's went through public review earlier this year. We received 110 comments on it, many of them consolidated comments, which we greatly appreciate from folks out there that comment on public documents. And there's some significant changes taking place right now, and it'll be released here in the next couple of months. And it really sets the path forward on how state agencies and departments are going to be working on adaptation and resiliency. And one big piece of that is working with our local and regional partners, NGO community, and folks that are working at the community level, because there's an acknowledgement that the state can't accomplish our goals on our own. We really need full buy-in from the communities that we work within. And to be honest, many of the communities in the state have been leading the efforts on climate change over the past decade. And so in some cases, we're actually catching up at the state level. And the third piece of this three-legged stool is the climate change research plan. So this is a place to understand where we need to do additional research to inform our policy, to think about the gaps in our understanding about impacts of climate change, and also how to effectively address greenhouse gas emissions in California. This is going to be going public in the next couple of months as well. Obviously, there's a lot of plans and programs that are going to come out of these three documents. Right now we have about 40 plus plans and programs that are being updated or managed to reflect the initiatives that are reflected in those three plans. So it's not a small undertaking, but when you go to institutionalize the consideration of climate change in an organization as big as the state of California, it does have a cascading effect through our agencies and departments and how we're dealing with issues at every level. So I'll go to the next page. One important piece of this puzzle is the environmental goals and policy report. So this is a document that's supposed to be done every 4 years. The last one was done in 1978. Just checking to see who's listening. So if you remember, 1978 was the last year of the last Brown administration. It's an important document because it sets the stage for the environmental goals and policies of the sitting governor at the time. And so the current EGPR is still in public review. There's a number of workshops throughout the state occurring in the next couple of weeks. If If you go to the OPR website, which I'll give you the link at the end of this presentation, it will, and it's actually at the bottom of the slide here, but it outlines what's in the EGPR, and we're gladly accepting comments on it because this really does help set the direction of the state for high-level goals and programs that we're working on. Really providing a vision for the state, outlining the cross-cutting goals across all of our major policy initiatives, and one very important piece that has not been done very well anywhere to this point, and that's tracking our progress on particularly on the resilience side. And we have good indicators to track progress on greenhouse gas emissions, but when it comes to climate change impacts, resilience, there aren't a lot of indicators right now that effectively address this. So this attempts to capture that and set a path forward so we can understand how our policies are actually affecting folks on the ground. One important piece of this is understanding how California is going to change between now and 2050. So we have the impacts of climate change, which Mike outlined so well earlier, and there's going to be significant impacts by 2050 regardless of what the international community does. So we have a range of impacts that may occur on the low end if we take substantial action now, and on the high end if we don't take significant action. So there's some variability that we must anticipate in how those impacts might occur. But we also have population growth. We're expecting 12 million more people in the state by 2050. So going from 38 million to 50 million in the years between now and then. And that's a significant strain on our infrastructure and on our resources at the state. Once you add climate impacts on top of that, we have some real issues we need to address. So the next slide, the Environmental Goals and Policy Report looks at a number of cross-cutting goals. Decarbonizing the state's transportation and energy systems is one of the biggest priorities. Obviously, because the better we can do that and the better we can have successful case studies for use in other parts of the country and the world, the better we can anticipate emissions will be reduced and fewer impacts will occur from climate change itself. We have significant public lands in California we need to look at. Climate change is already affecting them, and we need to figure out management strategies to address that. The EGPR helps to set a path forward on doing that. Supporting healthy and sustainable communities. Obviously, sustainable communities is kind of a buzzword these days, but it does reflect the priority of looking at our local communities and thinking about how they're going to be impacted by climate change and how the state can come to the table and help support their initiatives to become more resilient. Building climate readiness and resilience into all policies. Again, this is institutionalization. And cross-sector collaboration and data availability. So we're at an interesting place right now, and I'm going to go into this in a couple minutes, but the data and information side of how we can develop policies and respond to the knowledge that we've gained so quickly on the impacts of climate change, we have a real opportunity now to enshrine that in a lot of the work that we're doing through policy development. I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. So the Safeguarding California Plan is the primary mechanism the state is dealing with the impacts of climate change through resilience. It's really a policy guide for state decision makers, not necessarily for local and regional actors, although it certainly helps to inform some of their efforts. Again, it's an update and integrated strategy. And I think there's a lot of work that's coming out of this plan that's going to help inform action at the local level. A couple of things that, next slide, please. Many of our initiatives, I was going to skip over this slide, but I think it's an important one. This describes some of the sectors, how we talk about the impacts of climate change in a sector, from a sector standpoint. We're looking at agriculture, biodiversity and habitat, emergency management, on down the line. We know of very specific impacts that will occur in all of these sectors, and so we're starting to address those actively. And understanding those impacts is very important in understanding how we'll be able to address them in the future. Next slide. And thinking about how we're actually working on the ground, one organization that's been very important for us is ARCA, the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation. It's the San Diego, Los Angeles, Bay Area, and Sacramento regions which have come together through their own collaboratives and joined a collaborative with the state to help support consensus on policy development, to provide feedback on state policy and programs, to help inform federal efforts on climate change. And already these regions, even though this group only formed last year, have provided significant input on state plans and programs to reflect priorities at the regional level. This is a bit of a change for the state, which has not historically worked deeply with our local partners on state policy. And we understand that for us to get additional greenhouse gas emissions and for us to become truly resilient, we all have to be sitting at the same table, local, regional, and state. Next page. An important piece of the puzzle is the federal government. Not historically been known for doing too much work on climate, but over the past couple of years, they've really come back to the table and have been working actively with us. Governor Brown sits on the State, Local, and Tribal Leaders Task Force on Climate Preparedness and Resilience. I know that's a mouthful. For short, it's called the Resiliency Task Force. At least for those of us that have to say that a lot. And this is a really important initiative to bring local leaders that are working on climate on the ground to the table with our federal partners who are trying to work on policy to free up resources to support those local and regional initiatives. And we have, Governor Brown sits on the task force, I'm supporting him as staff, and basically we're developing policy recommendations to the federal government to make it easier for state, regional, local, and tribal actors to take action on climate. Some of this is the federal government getting out of the way, some of it is the federal government being at the table, and others is reallocating or moving around resources to support our work. Acknowledging that most of what's going to be happening on climate through the rest of the Obama's administration is likely to occur through executive order and administrative action because of the lack of action in Congress. So, removing barriers, creating incentives, developing tools, all of these things are important. We see these as high priorities at the state. And one of the reasons we're at the table is to help support the development of these nationwide tools consistent with the development of tools that we've done in California. One example that ICLEI's been working actively on is this State Energy Efficiency Collaborative Clear Path Emissions Reduction Tool. Another mouthful, Seek Clear Path. And the California Public Utility Commission has funded this effort to support local initiatives on emissions reductions throughout the state. And we've been pleased that this has been able to be scaled to the national level. So now there's a nationwide tool that ICLEI's developed called ClearPath that really came out of the work that we funded in California. So it's an example of where a successful case study in one community or one state can be scaled up to impact national or global emissions. So the next page. And I hinted at this earlier, but the data and information side of this discussion is hugely important. We're at the cusp of a revolution in how people are able to access and manipulate data and information. There's open data initiatives occurring at the federal level and at the state level. We have businesses and NGO communities collecting and aggregating data at an enormous rate, and a lot of this information is becoming publicly available. The more information we have, the more confusing things can get unless we turn it into information that can actually be looked at and reviewed and understood easily. So the Geoportal is one way to do that. For the first time, all state data that's in geospatial format is going to be updated, and most state data. Obviously, there's some data layers that we'll never be able to share for privacy concerns, but the bulk of the data we have is going to be publicly available through the single Geoportal. And never before have we had an opportunity to release such data at such scale. There'll be an external API for those tech folks in the room so that third-party applications can be developed to support analysis of this data. So, this is just one example of something that's happening now. Next slide. I've just got a couple more slides. And so one place that we've been it's Friday. Visualizing the impacts of climate change for some time is CalAdapt. If you haven't gone to this website, it's a great resource. You can put in an address or a town or a county, and it gives you what the impacts of climate change is going to be in that community or your address. It's a huge resource, and it's being updated now to reflect the most current science and to link into the Geoportal so that we can have that publicly available information. Next slide. One big reason we're doing this is because we understand there's a lot of action taking locally, but there's still a lot of action needed. So the bottom pie chart shows the work that's actually happening on resilience and adaptation, and not a lot of it is actually taking place right now. We have the bulk of local governments in California have addressed greenhouse gas emissions in one way or another. Many of them through, at least over 200 of them through ICLEI's resources. And then the rest through either consultant tools or other resources that have been developed internally. And, but there's a lot of work needed to support further resiliency action at the local level. Next page. And one way we've tried to do this is by setting a policy framework out there that local governments can follow. The next step to this tool, and you can go to the next page, is to develop an online resource that reflects the policy recommendations in the Adaptation Planning Guide. If you haven't looked at this, it's a great resource to look at for how local governments should plan for adaptation and resiliency. And the next page is sort of thinking about how all this links together. You know, I've given you a lot of information about a lot of individual initiatives, but they all work together. It's a massive puzzle of policy, policy and tools. And working together, these tools support really robust action at the local, regional, and state level. Our federal partners coming to the table is also a really important piece of this. And the next page. But we have a lot of work to continue to do. One major area of focus through all of these policy revisions have been health. Health is something that affects us all significantly, and there's a growing mountain of evidence to support the discussion linking the impacts of climate change to health impacts and quality of life. So there's a lot of actions that we need to take moving forward, particularly on expanding partnerships and truly institutionalizing how we deal with climate change. And to do that, next slide, is we are having a forum in August on the practitioner community coming together basically to set a path forward on how we're going to do this. There's never before been a statewide conference on how we're doing on resiliency and adaptation. There's been a number of them on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, but never focused on this. And so if you're able to attend, this is going to be an exciting opportunity to meet other folks working on this issue and to learn quite a bit about this. So on the next page, here's some links that of the resources that I've referenced throughout the presentation. And I really appreciate all of you being here today. And I'll be here for a while, so if you want to have a conversation with me, that would be great. And I think we're going to have some opportunity for a conversation later on. So thanks again, and enjoy the day.